Making me choose my favorite books is honestly cruel. I dread two videos per year. The first one is the end of the year wrap up, where I'm supposed to pick out of like 12 months. And the second one is the mid year check in, which I'm supposed to pick between 6 months. So it should be half as easy, but it's not. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Lily. I am the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind. Today I'm going to chat with you about my mid year check in and my favorite books. I've tried to be like meaner to myself and be stricter about the books. I know that in the past I've not done this and I've kind of just talked forever about books, but no, we've got six best and six mentions and then sequels. So I'm not going to put sequels in because honestly, I feel like so much of judging a sequel is based on the books before it, and especially if it's a series ender and it's a trilogy, there's two more books. So just to get that out of the way, I'm just going to chat about sequels really quickly just to mention them. The first one was The Thorn Queen in April, which I read, which I absolutely loved. This is a sequel to The Rose Bargain. I'm just looking at my copy, a sequel to The Rose Bargain. And I really love this one and the way that it looks about trauma and what it will do to us and do to us differently than others. In the adult world, other sequels are This Blade of Ours, Prince of Swords, Eyes of Kings, and To Dance with Death. I'm not going to talk about those ones because there's a lot to do with them, and also some of them aren't even series enders, so we're just going to say we're not going to talk about those, which made it a little bit easier, but also not, because there are still more than 12 books here. So let me just chat off with my number one if you really just had to go there with me. Also, I own most of these books. I try to know that if I read a book and it's 5 stars, that I want to get a copy of it, just because I know it will make my life easier in the future. And also, I love the books. But some of these books are at my parents' house, and some of them are here, so I don't have all of them. The first one is one of these. It's Queen of Faces. I ended up reading this one because Chloe Gong blurbed it, and I am so pleased I did. It is one of the most inventive, interesting, unique world building. The idea of face transformations, the idea of what it would do in terms of us as a person, in a metaphor, in terms of gender, in terms of identity. It was just such a unique concept. I really loved it. I cannot wait for the sequel. I actually have the sequel on NetGalley, and it's one of those sequels that is burning a hole through my Kindle. That and Deadlock, burning a hole through my Kindle about books that I need to read. So if I'm very good, and also when I'm traveling and I just need some serotonin or some dopamine, basically, I might just jump into those. But yeah, it's Queen of Faces. With Thief and the Traitor Blade, which is technically, it's not really a sequel because you can read it totally independently of The Second Death of Locke. As a major fan of The Second Death of Locke, you know that I had to read The Thief and the Traitor Blade, and I loved it. It has my favorite tropes of estranged spouses who have to come together and, in this case, work together, but come together and try to figure out if they can work together and if they honestly also can maybe get back together if that's something that they want. Also, the fantasy world is fantastic. The Easter eggs for The Second Death of Locke are Chef's Kiss. And yeah, it just has my favorite trope. And also the I hate to love you is truly, truly so true with them. And also the things that they have done to each other. We don't actually know if they can ever come back from that. Next, we have This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me, which honestly bugs the heck out of me because I have this and I have the really sought after special edition of this. I was taking photos of it last week. I don't know where it is in my apartment. I don't know where it is. But anyway, This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me. I'm a huge fan of the meta, oh, I've fallen into my favorite book series, and whoa. I also love when they know it. I love when they're oh my god, in my case, they would think that this is amazing, but it actually sucks because I have no skills. That is the case for This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me. She falls in and she has all this knowledge which helps her and sort of makes her kind of like a spy master, but she's also awful in terms of kind of combat skills, in terms of any other skills, and she's also borderline can die, which is interesting. Also, the side characters and the way that the world changes and morphs in front of your very eyes, and the way that she has to figure out if her helping these people or helping them avert their fate or interacting with them is worth her security, because the more information that she gives out and the more information and the more things about the world she changes, the less valuable her own skills and information are. So, love that one. Then we have A Wild Radiance, which honestly was another one of these YA books where the world is just so fabulous. It's a historical fantasy. And so there's this idea of kind of electricity, more or less, kind of being a power magical source, but it's kind of set in the Industrial Revolution. We have historical figures. We also have people who have to really sort of take apart and dig apart the idea of kind of religious institutions, the idea of kind of just institutions of power in general, of academia, of like the way that the world works, and really realizing that maybe this isn't the way that it should work, and maybe I shouldn't be complicit in this. How am I complicit in it? It just, I love this one so much. It's a backlist one that I actually read to do a panel for, and I loved this one so much. It just was like my exact brand of queer, of kind of like a the rich kind of suck. And also historical fantasy is honestly one of my favorite subgenres that I've been reading this year. Then we have The Winged Game, which I actually have. I am not a sports romance person, but The Winged Game got me. And look, I don't know what specifically about The Winged Game got me so hard, but I think it's because The Winged Game has animal mounts, and I love like a good crotchety, reckless, angry, grouchy kind of animal companion, and The Winged Game has that to a T. Basically, the main character is disbarred from her favorite sport for allegations of cheating, which she totally hasn't done. But then she gets this opportunity to get back into the sport, which she has to team up with her fierce rival from before and also be in a fake relationship with. And like honestly, is mainly on here because it is the only book where this whole year that I've read where I've been like, I need to cancel all plans. I read the bare minimum of what I needed to do and just immediately jumped in, and I did not stop reading until I finished. I will link down below some TikToks where I talk about that. But yeah, The Wing Game was one of the books which kind of just sparked this reemergence of my love of reading. Like, I obviously love to read, but The Wing Game was one of those books where I was like, oh my god, this is why I love to read. So that's why that one is there. And then finally, we have The Everlasting, which was just my brand. I cannot believe I waited so long to read The Everlasting. It's basically this story where the main character is more or less kind of a academic scholar. He's doing research into the legends, and specifically one of the characters, Una. Una is kind of this warrior, inspiring legend from the past, and so he's doing research into it and kind of ends up falling into Una's story, and it sort of kicks off them things where Una keeps everlasting. Like she keeps, I don't want to spoil very much about it because that's really all I'll give, but it's basically a story which really looks at the importance of stories, the importance of what the past can tell us about the present and what can tell us about the future. It really is a firm believer that if we have inspirations, hopes, and legends from the past, it gives us hope for the future, which is such a beautiful message and also so true. It has kind of, some of the reasons that I love it I can't talk about because they're spoilers, but like everything that you've ever heard positive about The Everlasting is 100% true. It's just so much my vibe in a book that I can't believe I waited so long to read it. And now let me jump into my mentioned books. The first one is Until the Clock Strikes Midnight. This was such a gorgeous book, which kind of is like a fun fairy godmother Fairly Ever After, the Fairly Odd Parents mashup where these two fairy sort of pseudo godparent figures have to come together to advise these humans. These are the fairies, these are the humans, but they have different life views or different views about like, should we meddle with them? How much should we meddle with them? Should we give them only hopes? What should we do with them? And they're both competing for the same kind of promotion, I guess, in their sort of fairy bureaucratic systems. One is a misfortune and one is a guardian, so they're coming at it from opposite perspectives. And what I really loved about this one is it really talks about kind of like what is our fate? What's our destiny? What is best for a person? And like what happens when what we think is best for a person isn't? How do we remedy that? How do we make amends? And how do we figure out what we really want to at the end of the day? Then we have Right as Rain, which is so fun. Basically, the main character all of a sudden gets struck with lightning. Then she has this like rain cloud that is over her head, which mirrors her emotions. She's currently also trying to get like a coveted internship and also trying to sort of escape her family situation and her hopes at kind of escaping that and getting a good, I think, internship for the future. She wants to get off the wait list for her dream university, and this is kind of the way to do it. I love the story because it talks about mental health, it talks about love, and it also talks about wanting something better for yourself. I feel like with mental health, we get this idea that like we should want it because it's better for the future. We should want it because we'll be happier. And it like talks necessarily about a lot of these conversations has this idea of like happiness being the end goal. And I just also don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable to be like, I'm going to want to be happy forever. That's not realistic. And so this kind of looks about having to find the silver lining for yourself and realizing what that means for yourself instead of kind of like the whole cookie cutter kind of, oh, I'm gonna not be so depressed or I'm not gonna be so anxious because I'm just gonna be happy all the time. It's gonna be amazing, which is just not how it works. So Right as Rain definitely is one of my favorite. And also Tashi is like an auto-buy author. I really love all of Tashi's books. Then we have The Girl with a Thousand Faces, which is a historical fantasy. I really loved how this one looks at the like colonialism and the historical fiction time period specifically, but also this book is so deeply committed to exploring the idea of memory, the past, and specifically the ghosts that haunt us. It's just this beautifully gorgeous story about that in a historical fiction setting, which really looks at what we will do to put to bed the ghosts in our past, the things that are haunting us. And I can't talk about like why at the end it ends up being one of the books that I want to talk about because that is major spoiler territory, but it was just so good. I've been looking forward to this book for a really long time, as you can tell. This is a special edition of it. And I was so impressed with the blend of historical fiction and the blend of fantasy stories specifically. The main character is sort of this character who is an exorcist, but in the sense of like I'm gonna exorcise you, but also you should get justice. And if you as a ghost kind of want to rip apart everyone who's wronged you, so what? That's kind of the main character. She has washed up there and doesn't have any memories of her past. So a large part of the story is looking at her memories of the past and what won't let her go about her past. And that's what I love the most about it. That's like a later latter half, basically, development in the story. So I can't really talk about that one as well. But that is why that is there. Stay for a Spell is my favorite in the new to me cozy fiction or cozy fantasy books. Basically, our main character is a princess and she ends up getting cursed when she visits a bookstore to stay in the bookstore until she fulfills her heart's desire. Her parents are convinced that her heart's desire comes from marrying a prince, so they just basically send her all these princes and are like, here, kiss. Great. She meets up with another person who's cursed, and they're trying to look at the books in the bookstore to figure out what can break their curse. And of course, what I really loved about this book is that she really has to navigate and like deeply kind of break down what makes her happy, because she's so convinced that she has to go back to this life of diplomat lifestyle. But what really makes her happy at the end of the day, when she has to be forced to think about what truly makes her happy, what will make her happy, and what is the key to unlocking this curse and to standing up for herself. I think this is such a beautiful kind of theme. I recommended it to my mom. And this is such a theme that I feel like I need to hear on a daily basis. So Stay for a Spell is one of my favorite new to me cozy fantasy books. We Dance Upon Demons is a fantastic contemporary fantasy book. Basically, our main character, she works in a women's clinic, and so obviously she's in the US and she works in a women's clinic, and it is awful. There are protesters all the time, funding is being cut, like she has death threats. It's just as predictably awful as you would imagine, but she ends up sort of coming into contact with a demon who can give her powers, but she's not sure if she should accept them. And she's also working daily at her women's clinic. So I really really loved about this one is that it looks at the way that we are powerless and are powerful. In the job she has, she feels really powerless because people are really awful. There's protesters. Their protesters are like talking women out of the care that they need. The legislation, like, it's just a rough time to be a woman in the US. And so that obviously makes her feel very powerless. But when she has this ability to have power, what does that mean? Does she take that as well? And so the idea of community, of solidarity, what it means for that, and specifically with the idea of being powerless, powerful, what we can really do at the end of the day, I thought all of that works together to really prove why fantasy is such a beautiful lens to talk about the contemporary things that are in our society, or to talk about metaphors for our current society or for our future society. And We Dance Upon Demons is just like double thumbs up, the best book to talk about that. You Did Nothing Wrong is a book that was disconcerting, but it's just a book that I ended up really loving. CJ Drews is an author I've had on my TBR for honestly forever, and this one was just so good in the way that you have to be so comfortable or maybe uncomfortable with your discomfort. You don't really know what is really happening. Unreliability is a huge factor. Haunted house is a huge factor. Basically, the main character is newly married. She has a son. They move into this dude's house, which needs serious renovations. And so as they're living there, that's kind of like, ooh, is nothing really seems like it says it is. This guy was like, oh, my house is so great. His house is not really that great. And also this house maybe is haunted, question mark, maybe. And it was a book that really delves into parenthood. It delves into love, unconditional love, conditional love. Just parents in general, parental figures are such a huge theme in this one. I listened to this on audiobook, and honestly, it's a book that has haunted me ever since. I continuously think about it, and if I become a horror reader by the end of 2026, You Did Nothing Wrong has to be one of the books that has really kind of stemmed me wanting to become more in the horror genre, because it just is a beautiful way that the horror genre can really talk about these kind of issues and not just sort of scare for scare fact. I wouldn't say that all horror books do that, and I think also Japanese Gothic is a really good example of a horror book that isn't not like scaring just for scare factor. It's scaring to look at the actual ghosts, the way that we are haunted. And so I think both of these books really beautifully look at the way that horror as a lens and horror as a tool can be used. And so I love this one. Honestly, I cannot believe that I've been reading so many horror books in 2026 as someone who just finished a horror book last week, but this is just the really weird life that I'm living in right now currently. And the last one is The Ocean Would Paint Me Blue. This contemporary is just so gorgeous. It is this book where this main character her mom dies. So then she ends up going to kind of like a pretty intense upper, I would say like progressive because they're in New York City, but a pretty fancy school where she's the only Muslim girl. What I enjoyed from the very beginning is that it really navigates the way that Islamophobia is really entrenched, specifically in the United States, and the way that these kind of, well, I would say, they're in New York City. They're sort of like count themselves as being very liberal, being very progressive, but also are deeply Islamophobic at the same time. And so it looks about that, and in specifically this kind of small microcosm of society in that sense. But also she can't see colors at that moment because her grief just has left her like that, and she is an artist. Trigger warnings, definitely check them out. But it's just a beautiful story about grief and about finding our voice, finding our community, and about what it takes to persevere and also to find joy in spite of some really awful hardships and in spite of grief as well. So, those were my bests and my mentions of my mid-year check-in for 2026. I hope that you've enjoyed, and also please let me know down below what some of your favorites were, because honestly, I should really be more proud of myself for narrowing it down so much, considering how many favorites I had. And honestly, I cannot imagine how it will be at the end of 2026. As I said, don't look forward to it every year. So, I hope you have a really great rest of your reading day, week, month, and year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!